it out?
Yep.
Yeah, it is. I really like that one. That one's nice.
Welcome back, everybody. My name is Mike. I run the Mr. Guns and Gear channel. I realize this video for a lot of you is probably the first time seeing me. We do a lot of product reviews here, recommendations, tutorials, things like that on the channel. And this, I believe anyway, is my first video that's going to be available for Mug Club folks and for regular viewers of the channel. Basically today, we are going to be talking about silencers, everything you need to know about silencers, really everything. This should give you 99% of the answers to any of the questions that you should have if you can watch this whole video. That said, we're not going to do the entire video here on YouTube simply because this type of content has been banned. It's caused me to get over 300 videos deleted due to YouTube's policies over the last year, and that's one of the great things about now being here on Mug Club. So a lot of the things like mounting, tutorials, things like that, we're going to do exclusively on Mug Club for Mug Club members, and we're still going to give you some good information up front that should help you get started down your journey. If you guys are looking to sign up for Mug Club right now, there is a code and a link in the video description, but code Mr. Guns and Gear, spelled like the channel name, will get you guys a free month of Mug Club, so that way you guys can see what's going on over there and see if you want to stick around and watch folks like Steven Crowder, Brian Callen, Jim Brewer, Nick DiPaolo, lowly me, and other folks that may be coming on board as well. So for those of you guys who are new here, welcome. Now let's get into the topic of today's video, silencers. So we're going to kind of walk through here. Obviously we have very high-tech aids that will keep me on track throughout the video, and basically these notes are just my notes. They're for me, and then I will show you examples. We have, I don't know, at least 70 silencers out here today that should serve as a good example of different things that we're going to talk about. So first off, why would you want a silencer? So there's a lot of different reasons. First one that comes to mind is going to be safety. So everyone's safety. Hearing safe is a thing where folks will talk about being able to fire a gunshot and not damage your hearing. We'll get into that a good bit here in just a second, but I will say this, is that a gunshot unsilenced versus a gunshot with a silencer on there, the one with the silencer on there is going to do less damage to your hearing, and that is basically inarguable. Now, whether or not it will do damage, we'll talk about here in a second, but it's definitely a safer shooting experience to shoot with silencers or suppressors or cans. You'll hear me say all three words throughout the video interchangeably, and if you guys want to argue about that nomenclature, feel free to do so down below. But there's no doubt about it that you are absolutely going to reduce the amount of hearing damage to yourself and anyone around you if you're shooting guns, if you're using a silencer. So the next one is going to be mental state. So this one is particular for folks who are shooting indoors, whether it be a home defense type of scenario, shooting at an indoor range, things like that. So there's been a number of studies that have been done. I will try to link to all of this stuff down below in the video description so you guys can do your own research. But there's been a number of studies that have been shown that particularly when shooting inside, folks' mental acuities go down due to the concussive effects of gunshots. So this is something that I think a lot of people don't really think about, but it is very real, particularly if you're shooting rifles or shotguns indoors. People's mental acuity goes down from time to time. Not everyone, but a lot of people. And if you're in a gunfight inside, typically you want your mental acuity to be as high as possible, so suppressors help you keep that. Next one up is going to be communication. So this is important for everyone. It's not just law enforcement, military type folks. So if you think about, again, a home invasion scenario, we're just going to use that for example. If you have your kids in different bedrooms and other family members, maybe your in-laws or something like that in another bedroom, and you have to crack off 4 or 5 shots from an AR-15 to stop a threat who has come into your house to harm your family, the ability for you to communicate afterwards to everyone involved is greatly increased if you have a suppressor on your firearms. So number one, the reason for that is your hearing will be less damaged if you're using that suppressor like we already talked about. So you'll always hear people talk about shooting a gun and then hearing the ree in their ears. Well, that noise makes it hard to communicate with other folks, and the same is true if they're not the ones firing the gun, but they're just near you when you or a criminal are firing the gun as well. Having less impact noise around them allows them to, in the short term afterwards, after the gunshots, it allows you to more effectively communicate. Additionally, for military, law enforcement, self-defense, home defense type scenarios, that absolutely applies as well. So the United States Marine Corps did a really good study, probably 5 or 6 years ago now at this point, as of when I'm filming this video. And basically what they did is they took a battalion of Marines and outfitted every single weapon that they were using with a suppressor, and then ran them through 29 Palms, which for the Marines out there, you guys know what I'm talking about. But 29 Palms is a training center, and ran them through all different types of battle scenarios and compared the unit using suppressors to the unit that was not using suppressors, and their efficacy on the battlefield went up dramatically. A lot of reasons for that, but primarily is going to be the ability to communicate more effectively. So if you can communicate more effectively, that is always going to be a net positive, and that is regardless of the scenario that you find yourself in after a gunfight. So how do decibels work? That is kind of a key one here. So throughout the video, you guys are going to probably hear me reference decibel reduction anywhere from 15 to 40 decibels. That's typically the range that you're going to see with modern silencers that we're going to talk about here in the video, and really that anybody makes on the market today. But one thing to remember whenever we're talking about decibels is that decibels are not linear in terms of how they're measured. So they are logarithmically measured. So that means that depending on whom you ask, I've read PhD papers from audiologists that say either 3 decibels or 5 decibels is a doubling in the amount of sound that you perceive to your human ear. So doubling in terms of what you perceive, that's a significant increase. So a gunshot typically is going to be in the range of 160 decibels to 170 decibels, depending on a number of the variables, including environment, like we were talking about inside versus outside, the type of muzzle device, the type of round being used, the type of firearm being used. So generally speaking, you're going to be in that range of 160 to 170. But keep in mind, for what I just said, if you go from 160 to 165 decibels, that is double the perceived amount of noise that you're getting. So it's a lot, just that range. So with a suppressor, generally speaking, you're going to see numbers anywhere from 120 to 150 decibels. Now, it's going to depend on a lot of different variables that we will touch on in the video. And one thing that you will see if you do any number of research into, any type of research, I should say rather, into silencers is that OSHA, the government agency, defines 140 decibels as the peak exposure that you can be exposed to without creating hearing damage. But the thing that people forget about a lot when they're talking about silencer use is that that is a one-time peak exposure, and I believe that is once a week is how they regulate that. So 52 exposures over the course of a year. If they come closer together, i.e. you fire 3 rounds in a row at 140 decibels of sound, you're still going to cause hearing damage. So it's important to keep that in mind. But that is something to consider. Again, if it is down by like 130, if you have which is a very quiet firearm, 130 decibels, you could probably get away with firing 3 or 4 shots without having any type of hearing damage. But again, if we go back to the baseline of 160 to 170 decibels, one of those rounds is going to cause permanent hearing damage. If you fire a bunch off in a row, it is going to cause high levels of hearing damage, perhaps permanent, that you will pay for the rest of your life. So obviously you want to minimize that as much as possible, which is why we're talking about silencers today. So there is that. Different categories of silencers. So there's 3 main types that you're going to see. You're going to see rimfire, which is for firearms that use, generally speaking, 22 LR, 22 long rifle, or 22 short rifle. You'll see both. But basically they're going to be used on guns that are not very powerful. And they tend to be the cheapest, they tend to be the lightest, and they tend to be the dirtiest. And then you have your pistol suppressors, which, as the name would imply, are for handguns. And then you have your rifle silencers, and then you have multi-use rather, so they work on pistols and rifles. Then you have some weird ones, which are shotguns, but the most common for sure, all 3 are going to be rimfire, pistol, and rifle. So the rifle ones tend to be the heaviest of all of them, simply because they're containing, I should say, the largest amount of pressure. As the bullet exits the barrel of a rifle, there's just a lot more pressure, a lot more gas, a lot more things expanding very quickly than there is when you're firing a pistol. It just kind of is what it is. So you have to use different materials, things like that, to make it safe and make the silencers last. So we will get into all that here in just a second. Cleaning, service, and lifespan. So cleaning silencers, it really depends on what type of silencer you have and how you're using it. So if you're using a rimfire suppressor, like I said earlier, they are the dirtiest. That's absolutely true, and you do want to clean them. So with a rimfire suppressor, we will give you guys an example here. It would be like this one here. This is a Gemtech 22 silencer. This pistol fires 22 long rifle. It's a Sig Sauer P322, and the Gemtech here is completely disassemblable, which we'll show you here in a second, for cleaning. So the reason you want to clean rimfire suppressors, like I said, they're the dirtiest, and what ends up happening is all of the lead that is not burnt out and not pushed out the end of the silencer will build up in the baffles or the monocore, which those terms may be new. We will get to them here in a second. And if you were to say fire, example, 1,500 rounds through this silencer, the actual internals of it will start to grow with that lead sticking to it. The silencer will get heavier. It will also become less effective because there's less area inside of it, because the lead is taking up the area instead of the oxygen, which will be used to actually cool down the air as it goes through it, which brings up another point. How do silencers work? So the basic of it, the super base level explanation, and there's a lot more to it than this, is that they cool down the gases as they exit the muzzle. So basically, we'll roll in some screenshots here. There's been a lot of good data that's been done, good testing that has been done with high-speed cameras and things like that over the last 20 years. But basically, when a projectile is leaving the barrel of a firearm, there are a lot of things that are coming out of it. Number one, gas that is created from the burning of the gunpowder, as well as unburnt gunpowder is also coming out. And then, of course, the projectile itself is coming out. So if that all comes out at once, that instant expansion and the heat that comes out causes a very loud noise, which is the gunshot. So if you're able to slow it down as it goes through a suppressor, that gas, what that does is it decreases the report because it all comes out slowly instead of all at once. So that is the basics of how a silencer works. So it's cooling it all down, and what that causes is it causes the suppressor itself to heat up very, very rapidly. So if you fire a few rounds through a suppressor, best to not grab it shortly afterwards, or else you'll have a burn on your hand. It is a self-correcting exercise, though. If you do it, you'll probably never do it again. But that is how they work. The actual laws that go into suppressors. Now, here's the not fun part, right? So the United States, if you guys are watching this in the United States, if you guys are watching this in other countries, the laws are totally different, like in a completely different way in just about every country with the exception of Canada. So most countries have much more liberal, I guess we'd say, rules on silencers than we have in America. But the laws in America are very restrictive. So we have what's called the National Firearms Act, which was a law that was passed decades ago, and it restricted a lot of things, basically things that criminals could, or excuse me, politicians, which I guess is the same, but things that politicians could demonize. So like short barrel rifles, short-barreled shotguns like sawed-off shotguns, suppressors, silencers, things like that is what they regulated. They were actually trying to regulate handguns if you look into the history of it. But again, that's a video for another day. But anyway, so we have what's called the National Firearms Act. So that is a law that heavily regulates ownership of silencers in America. So all the good things that we just talked about, we're going to talk about some bad things legally. Then we have some other bad things down here as well that we'll get to on Mug Club exclusively. Again, link down below and coupon code for you guys to sign up over there for that. But the laws, let's talk about it. So not all states allow for silencers. So the United States as a whole absolutely does. And in the United States, presuming that you don't have any additional state laws on the possession and use of silencers, you can buy a silencer. And basically what they require is that you do a background check, which is the same 4473, which is a ATF form that you would fill out if you were purchasing a firearm. So you fill that form out, you send it in with a copy of your fingerprints, your photo, and basically a check for $200 or a credit card. You can use a credit card. And you send it into the ATF, and they'll be linked down below if you guys are looking to pick or fill one of these forms out to purchase one. But you can go ahead and send that out, and then the ATF, if you actually look on their website, I think it says expect 2 weeks is what I think it still says that, but that's not realistic. Realistically, it's going to take, depending on the state that you live in, anywhere from 4 months to a year to get approved, and once it gets approved, you can take possession of your silencer. So how does that process work? Well, so you can see here we have 3 different forms, ATF forms, in addition to the 4473 that we already talked about. You know how people are like, we just need common sense gun laws? I think we have enough gun laws, as you guys are going to see here in a second. We're talking about tubes. This is literally a tube of metal. It's not even a firearm. It's completely harmless to anyone around it. And all these laws that I'm talking about are going to apply to the ownership of it. So if people think we need more gun laws, think again. All right, so Form 1. So Form 1 is one of the ways that you can get a silencer. So in America, since the inception of the United States, and honestly even before that, when we were a colony, we have always been able to manufacture firearms for our own personal use in America. That has never ever been prohibited on the federal level, ever. So don't believe what they tell you. It's never happened. And a Form 1 is the form to make a National Firearms Act item to include firearms, but also in this case to include suppressors. So you can absolutely manufacture your own suppressor. I believe it's still up on Rumble. It's not on YouTube anymore, but I did a video where I went through the process to create a Form 1 silencer with an oil filter, and I tested it out with mil-spec decibel meters, which we should talk about as well. But I tested it out to see how it would work and just walk through the whole process for everybody. If you guys want to check it out, it is still on Rumble for you guys to see. But decibel meters, I'm going to get back to that form here in a second. The squirrel just got me. So we talked about decibels, how they work, the logarithmic measurements and stuff like that. The decibel meters that you guys can buy on like Amazon or something like that, they absolutely are not applicable for gunshots in any way. Like they literally don't work. They will give you a reading, but it will be completely wrong. And the reason for that is the measurement of a gunshot happens so fast. You need very, very high-tech, specialized equipment to be able to measure it. And I mean, I've looked for years now. I mean, I have one myself, but I've looked just for deals and things like that. And you're not going to find one that's capable of doing that. As of when I'm recording this video anyway, for under $10,000. Most of them are $15,000 up to $50,000. So they're very, very expensive equipment. So if you guys ever watch a video or something like that and somebody has some janky Amazon thing, that's great. But it's not data that's going to help you in any way when evaluating a suppressor. Anyway, Form 3 is a form that would be generated in the standard process of buying a silencer. So most folks don't make their own silencers. That used to be a lot easier up until about 2 or 3 years ago, where you could buy kits online and then just drill out the holes yourself. However, the ATF has frowned upon that in recent years, let's just say. Even though it's still completely legal, there's no law prohibiting it at all. The ATF has pretended there is a law, which there isn't. So Form 1s are becoming less and less popular. You still would need to submit your $200 check to the government to ask the king for permission. But that is the Form 1 process. The Form 3, again, the Form 3 and the Form 4 are the most common ways that folks would buy a silencer. So in America, gun shops are called FFLs, Federal Firearms Licenses, and then a subset of those gun shops have what's called a Special Occupational Tax License, which is often referred to as an SOT. So if a gun shop has their SOT, which is a special license that we apply for from the ATF, I have one, which is one of the ways I'm enabled to have all these silencers that you guys are going to see here in just a second. But if you have your SOT, you can transfer and sell suppressors or any other NFA items to regular folks out there in America. So if you are looking for the local SOT in your area, you can just go to sotfinder.com, plug in your zip code, and you guys will be able to find one. If that doesn't work, FFL Finder does. They've gone back and forth over the years. But anyway, so a Form 3, when you go into your local gun shop and you're like, hey, I want to buy, just as an example, one of the most popular silencers in America. This is the Surefire RC2 silencer. It's, again, one of the most popular in America for sure. I want to buy a Surefire RC2, and your gun dealer doesn't have one in stock. Well, what he's going to do is reach out to the folks at Surefire. Surefire will fill out this form here, a Form 3, with the ATF that's going to let them know that the silencer that they have. I'm laughing because it's so absurd. This process is so absurd. We're talking about a piece of metal, and all of these forms have to be filled out. Anyway, so he's going to fill out a Form 3 that is going to tell the ATF that they are transferring the silencer that they have in their possession on their books with the ATF to your local gun shop. So it will get sent there. That process is pretty quick. Honestly, it usually takes, it may change over the years, but like as of right now, it takes like 2 days, 3 days maybe, max for the ATF to approve that form. The ATF will approve that form. Then the suppressor will be sent to your local gun shop. So at that point, you're going to walk into your local gun shop and fill out your Form 4. That's a form that you're actually going to fill out yourself with your fingerprints, your photo, and your background check all on there. So that will be filled out, sent in with the $200 check, and then the wait starts. Now, during that process, if your local SOT or your NFA dealer has like a range on site, you can go in there, and we call it conjugal visits in the industry. So you can go in there and they're able to give you your silencer as long as you don't leave the premises, and you're able to shoot it at their range and things like that until it comes back with the form approved. And then when your Form 4 comes back approved, at that point, your dealer can hand you your silencer and you can take it home with you. And you can have it in your possession legally, again, provided that your state allows you to have silencers. Almost all states allow folks to have silencers, but you can probably guess the ones that don't. So at that point, you have your silencer in your possession. It is completely legal for you to own anywhere that it's legal to own, obviously. The downside of it is that that Form 4 that you just got approved from the ATF goes on to what's called the National Firearms Act Registry. So firearms registries in America are explicitly prohibited by law. That said, we do have them in America. I've made multiple videos exposing this before about how the ATF has registries that they claim they don't have, but they absolutely do. But one that they openly admit to having is the NFA registry, the National Firearms Act Registry. So when you fill out that Form 4, it goes on that registry. And depending on a number of factors, one downside to the NFA registry is that it can be, not all, but some of them can be FOIA'd. So with that, like if you're someone like myself who the media hates, they can go and find out who has what, and it is something that a lot of gun owners don't like. It's a downside for sure, is that it is a registered item. So, if for whatever reason, 100 years from now they ban silencers, the ATF knows where they are, and they would know where to go. So that is the downside of the NFA registry. Now, one thing I need to say about that is an upside of the NFA registry. Folks who are new here, new to firearms, and a lot of this stuff is like drinking from the fire hose that I'm saying. I get it. I have hundreds of videos on suppressors that should help you out. You guys can check them out. But anyway, one of the things that's very good about the NFA registry, and it's counterintuitive to even say that, but it's true, is that it shows the government that these items are common use. So I remember, I'll just tell this anecdotal story now. So I remember being a kid back in the 80s, and our local Ace hardware store used to sell machine guns. So for folks that don't know, I'm getting off on a tangent. But for folks that don't know, up until 1986, machine guns were NFA items just like these are, and you could purchase them at your local SOT, fill out your form, and back then it was 2 weeks for real that they would come back and approve it, and you would get your machine gun and take it home. So one of the benefits of the registry is that it becomes common use. So there has been a number of cases, particularly with machine guns in this case, where ownership of machine guns in particular states has been ruled by courts to be common use and therefore not able to be prohibited. And the reason they're able to rule that it's common use is because the government actually knows the number of how many of them there are out there, at least legal ones anyway. So one of the benefits now, getting back to silencers, of the NFA registry is if you look at the number of legally owned silencers in America, if I can find that data, I will roll it in here on your screen, but it has gone up exponentially since about 2008. So basically when the internet became a thing and started being prolific and people could watch videos like this and learn about silencers, learn about the benefits of them, people wanted them because of all the reasons that we already talked about. There's a lot of benefits to suppressors, and the ownership of suppressors just blew up. And so one of the good things about the NFA registry, again, which is crazy, is that right now there are multiple, because of the Bruin decision, which was a recent Supreme Court decision, because of the Bruin decision, there are multiple lawsuits that are ongoing right now trying to get the NFA, the National Firearms Act, abolished, saying that it is unconstitutional because it doesn't meet the text, history, and tradition standard that has been established in Bruin. And one of the very easy ways that they're going to use that in court is they're going to say there are millions and millions of suppressors legally owned in America, and obviously it's not a problem. There's not prolific crimes happening every day in America because people are sneakily using suppressors to get away with crimes. It's absolutely not a thing. So the fact that the NFA registry exists, of course, is horrible. I'm not a fan of it in any way, but in these lawsuits, it probably will come to our benefit, because I do think it will help our cause in getting these regulated as common use items and therefore thrown off the NFA. I think it is quite possible that the more we have out there in America legally owned, the more likely that they will become off this registry. But for now, they are on the registry. Next thing we want to talk about is the legal issues that come along with the NFA registry. So right now, this is since President Obama was president, he enacted a rule, not a law, mind you, not a law. No law was passed, but he enacted a rule which was called 41F and 41P, if you guys want to look it up. And basically what that did was it reformed the way trusts used to be able to own silencers or any NFA items, to include machine guns, short barrel rifles, and things like that. So the way it worked until Obama was president was that you could create a trust and have any number of people in it. It could be 100 people in it. And when they went to submit the form for your silencer, only one person had to do the fingerprints, only one person had to do the photo, only one person had to fill the form out. But when the trust took ownership of the item, anyone in that trust could legally possess it, could use it, could do whatever with it. And it just made everything a lot easier legally. And I think it just simply wasn't an issue for the government and the tyrants that run it until, again, like I mentioned, the internet came about and everyone started getting silencers, and they started being like, oh no, we have to regulate this in some stupid way that's unconstitutional. So they did, and they passed a rule called 41P and 41F. And basically what that did was eliminate most of the good things that went along with trusts, but it did have a grandfather clause. So like if you hear people talk about, oh, I have a silencer that's in a trust, and so my dad is on the trust so he can use it or something like that, they're telling you the truth. That is a real thing. However, in 2023, as of when I'm recording this video, that has largely been eliminated. And so one of the issues that brings up is possession and lawful possession. So for example, if I, Mike, went through and filled the form out for this as an individual, not as a special licensee like I am, but just pretend I'm not. Some of these silencers out here are in my name, they're not in my license. But say I had this and went to the store, left the rifle at home that had it on there, and then my wife used the rifle to defend herself against somebody who broke into the house. Technically, she would be in violation of possession of an NFA item because I wasn't there at the property. Now, to my knowledge, no one has actually been prosecuted for this to date, but as we know with our government being what it is, that is a possibility in the future, so just kind of know that going forward. Then additionally, other legal issues are going to be inheritance. So like if you were to own a silencer and then you die and wanted your kid to have it, your kid would have to fill the exact same form out and go through the exact same process again to get it approved. So it is a hassle in that regard, for sure. There are other legal issues that go along with this as well. So crossing state lines is one that comes up a lot. If you cross state lines with an NFA item, no matter what it is, including suppressors, technically you're supposed to let the ATF know 30 days prior, and then with a form, there's a specific form for this, they're supposed to approve it, and then you can travel with it across the state lines. Now again, have I ever seen anyone actually get prosecuted for not doing that? No, but that is the law and that is the way it reads, so do with that information what you will. Now we're going to move on to construction, and this is probably going to be the last category that we're going to talk about here before we go over to Mug Club, simply because there's a lot that's going to go on after we get into this that YouTube doesn't like. But basic construction of a silencer, there are 2.5 types of silencers, we'll call it, normally speaking. So typically you have your monocore, which is one piece of tubing, and then you'll have your baffles. Those are 98% of silencers that are out there on the market have one of those two systems to them. So let me just kind of fast forward here and take this sleeve off to show you guys what a monocore looks like, just for discussion's sake. Through the magic of video editing, we have pleased the YouTube overlords and taken the sleeve off. And now we're going to show you guys what a monocore silencer looks like. This is pretty common. Basically, it is one tube that goes all the way through, and then you have your outer sleeve, which goes over it to capture the gas. And these can be used for rifles, pistols, rimfire, etc. This one here is a rimfire, but this is a pretty common design that you'll see with a monocore design. And basically, again, like we talked about, what's happening as a round goes through is all it's doing is slowing down the gases and cooling down the gases as they go through the actual tube. And that's kind of how a monocore works. A baffle design works with baffles, as the name would indicate. So these are baffles. Typically they're cone shaped, not always, but typically. And there's a series of them inside the tube of the silencer. Most of your pistol baffles are going to be cleanable, like these ones, so you can take them apart and actually clean them. Most of your rifle ones are not. There are exceptions to that for sure. And there's different designs, different cone shapes that will produce different results in rifles, different results in pistols, etc. So it's not as simple as that, but that said, this technology has been around since pre-World War II, and it's been refined for sure in modern silencers, but it has been around a long time. And those are probably 98% of the silencers out there. So they're either going to be monocore or baffle. One of the pros and cons, I guess you'll say, to them is that, from what I understand, for folks who make them, manufacture them, the monocore ones tend to be a little bit less expensive to manufacture, which makes sense. There's less parts to it. However, one downside to monocore is going to be first round pop. So what that means is that when you're firing any suppressed firearms, typically the first round you fire is going to be louder. They call it the pop, first round pop. And the reason for that is when you're firing, all the oxygen is in here, and that oxygen is going to get ignited by the powder and the propellants that are coming through, and that will cause a pop. So you'll actually hear it. It is an audible thing. It is a real thing. And monocores do not as good of a job as minimizing that as baffles. That said, if you're deciding between a monocore and a baffled silencer, that should be one of the very few things you think about, because it's such a small thing that it's almost irrelevant. But I feel that we should mention it because we're talking all things suppressors. So like I said, that's probably 98% of suppressors that are out there on the market right now. That said, that number is going to change. If you were to watch this video in a few years, I think that number is going to be less. And the reason for that is the other two types of silencers that you're going to see out there, which are becoming more and more popular for good reason. So you'll see a lot of 3D printed silencers now. Not a lot, but more and more every year. And the reason folks are using 3D printed silencers is basically twofold. So right now, 3D printing metal is still relatively expensive. That cost is coming down every year though, as I'm sure many of you guys are aware. So the cost is coming down, which makes it obviously more affordable to produce silencers. And the thing that is nice about 3D printing is your designs are unlimited. So with traditional CNC machines, you're limited to typically 5 axes of milling and machining. You don't have any of that with 3D printed. So you can do any kind of design you want to the interior of the silencer. And I think as the years go by, they are going to improve dramatically. I predict that in the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to see a lot better sound reduction with 3D printed silencers. Also, probably they'll be lighter. But right now, the majority of them are either going to be monocore or baffled. And then the other one that you're going to see is flow-through silencers. So these are really cool, and one that I think a lot of folks should look at for a lot of reasons, which we'll talk about here right now, and then we'll get back into once we get over to Mug Club. So basically, this right here is the silencer from the folks at Huxworks. And the way it is designed, these are the most popular. Huxworks flow-through silencers are the most popular by far. It's not even close. SIG makes like a sort of flow-through, which is a hybrid, which we'll get to here in a little bit. And there's other companies that do as well. But for just absolute, like flow-through silencers, these are some of the best, if not the best, out there on the market right now. And these work in a way that's very different than baffles. So whereas that process, baffles or monocore, what it's doing is slowing progressively the gas as it goes through and cooling the gas as it goes through. These work sort of like a reverse turbine engine, excuse me. So what's actually happening is there's a series of vents that go back and forth. So instead of slowing it down as it goes through the silencer, flow-through silencers go down, the gas goes down, then it comes back, then it goes forward a number of times throughout the silencer, and then it exits out these jets out here at the end. And that is how it cools it down. So one of the advantages, the biggest advantage, well, there's several advantages to it, in my opinion, is the fact that it doesn't add any sort of back pressure into the firearm. So if you're using like a bolt action firearm where you're running the bolt and it's not a semi-automatic and not cycling by the use of its own propellant gas, then it's not that big of a deal. But if you're using a semi-automatic gun like an AK variant or an AR variant, then the reduced pressure on the gun is a huge benefit. We'll talk about why here in a little bit. But flow-through silencers, that is the big advantage of them, is the fact that they don't push a lot of gas back, a lot of pressure back into the gun. The downside of them, I'm speaking broadly here. The downside of them is that you're more likely to have a larger flash signature with them. That said, some of the modern designs are kind of minimizing that, but as a whole, they tend to have more flash signatures simply because, as you can imagine, the gas is kind of coming out all at once because of the way it flows through versus slowly petering out like it would with a traditional silencer. So those are the types of silencers that you're going to see. And then we have an alibi. So we have another type that we're going to talk about here that you're seeing more and more every year, and that is an integrally suppressed firearm. So this is one right here. This is obviously an AR-15, and it has an integral suppressor on there. So what does that mean? So it means that integral to the design of the firearm is the silencer. So you can't fire, like you can't buy this gun, this particular model, without a silencer. It will not work without a silencer. It is integral to the function of the gun. And so basically this is an AR-15. It has a 15-inch barrel, meaning the barrel goes out down to about here. And then obviously we have a suppressor out there in the end, but the suppressor actually comes all the way back here. So pros and cons to integral suppressors. The biggest pro of it is going to be that, like we mentioned earlier, the NFA, the National Firearms Act, covers a number of things. One of them is short barrel rifles. So when the silencer is built integral to the firearm itself, it counts as part of the barrel length. I realize it's dumb. I get it. I'm just trying to tell you that's how the ATF works. So because of that, like I said, the barrel on this, the actual barrel on it, what you and I would recognize as a barrel, stops right about here. But what the ATF recognizes as a barrel stops here because you can't take the silencer off. It's part of the actual firearm itself. So when you have to get a tax stamp, the $200 tax stamp that we talked about earlier, for this, the only tax stamp you have to get is for the silencer. You don't have to get one for a short barrel rifle because the barrel is technically the silencer, the way the ATF works at it. And another benefit of it is that you get increased volume. So basically most of your silencers are going to screw onto the end of a firearm, sort of just like this one, for example. It screws onto the end of the barrel. However, an integral suppressor works a little bit differently. So basically, like we said, the suppressor itself, or the barrel rather, excuse me, stops right about here, but you'll see the suppressor goes all the way back here. So there's actually baffles like that we talked about that are actually behind the barrel. So it actually gives more room for the gas to expand than you would get with a traditional silencer. So for the same size package, if you have an integrally suppressed firearm, it's going to be quieter, all things being equal. Of course, they're not always all equal, but if they are, your integral suppressor will allow you to get it quieter. I should also mention another benefit for a lot of you guys, depending on what state you live in. There are states that allow for silencer use and silencer possession, but do not allow for short barrel rifles. So if you live in one of those states, this is the way to go, in my opinion, to work within the laws, the unconstitutional laws of your state. Then additionally, there are other types of integrally suppressed firearms. This particular firearm here is a Smith & Wesson Performance Center Victory 22, and it has a Gemtech integrally suppressed barrel. So this entire barrel stops right about here. And the rest of it is a monocore design that looks very similar to that. It's basically, that's pretty much actually what it looks like. If you were to actually take it apart, if I can roll in photos, I will. But what it does, of course, is it keeps everything nice and compact, but gives you more volume, everything else being equal. So there are a number of integrally suppressed firearms, and I think they're going to become more and more common simply because they're efficient. Like we talked about, size efficient. And then, unfortunately, there's more and more states that are passing laws saying that you can't have short barrel rifles, which makes no sense, but a lot of them you can still have suppressors in. So in those states, they're becoming more and more popular. Before we get into all of the details that are in the red here that I don't think YouTube will let us talk about, I do want to close the video out for folks who are watching on YouTube. We will continue on Mug Club. So if you guys are a Mug Club member, in a couple seconds, you guys are going to see everything come on your screen and everything will be normal. But for the folks on YouTube, again, if you guys want to join us on Mug Club, link down below, or you can just go to mrgunsandgear.com/Mug Club. Again, code MrGunsandGear will get you guys a free month over there. And I look forward to seeing everybody over there. For now, YouTube, piss off.